something I've observed is that normally when people learn something, they kind of pick a specific thing that they want to learn about, and then they like hyperfixate on that, right? Um, so like for instance, we could have, let's just draw something here. Can they see that? Yeah. So there's all these paths, right? And someone might come along, a beginner, and they don't know about a lot of these paths, but maybe they stumble across this one, and they start going down this path, right? And they get pretty far, but eventually they come to a point where it's like too hard, and then they stop, right? They don't reach that next level. So then they can continue making incremental steps towards obtaining more knowledge, but it's really difficult. So eventually they might go on to the next path or focus on something else. If they are constantly trying to learn something, it could be the case that they just continue to use the knowledge they've gained right here, right? I don't know how they draw that. Right, they use this knowledge for something, projects, like anything that they want to build or something like that, they want to show off, right? They build projects with the knowledge they've gained. And a lot of people, they go down these paths, right? They reach a certain level, a certain understanding. There's certain milestones of understanding where they're like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. They make projects. And yeah, this keeps going, right? This is just how this is really my experience with with CS and with like math, right? And so a lot of the times, you might have like branches, and it like goes off into something else. And this is the knowledge tree essentially, right? Is that you're stumped. You don't know how to get to that very end level of knowledge, and you're stuck. And then you go on to the next path, and it keeps going, right? Now, what I propose to people is instead of sequentially going through each path, right, increasing your breadth, so to speak, incrementally, or your depth incrementally, what you should do to get out of this issue, right, is you should generalize your knowledge as much as possible. So what that means is that you should try to maybe not go to, like, for instance, at some point you're going to stop, right? But a lot of people go too far in terms of the depth of knowledge they have, and like they try really hard and they make incremental steps, and that's actually going to hurt you in the end, because eventually you're going to get to a point where it's like, okay, I actually have to really try to memorize this for me to actually make any progress. And what you should do instead is find a lot of different paths. You have to go path searching. That's what I'm going to call this. Is path searching. You got to find similar paths to the subject that you're trying to get to that next level of knowledge, right? This next level of knowledge, we're trying to get there. Find paths that are very similar, or might not even be similar, but just find a bunch of paths that are in like the same domain of knowledge, I guess, and just learn a little bit about each of them. Okay? So you don't have to spend like months and months trying to get an understanding. Like, just do this, okay? And when you do this, when you focus on breath, right? When you breath first search, essentially, right? That's kind of what it is. Breath first search, BFS. If you breath first search knowledge, essentially, if you go through each level, right, you have these branches, Let me actually make an actual thing. So, okay, guys, I'm back. I already recorded the video and I realized my face cam was covering up what I'm drawing, so I just got rid of that. And I'm gonna read you what I was talking about. So, basically, yes, you have all these paths of knowledge, and usually they're represented as trees, right? So you create these trees of knowledge. And let's just say that, like, you know, these base paths that are like really easy for people to find. You know, like these could be like programming languages. I'm using CS topics because that's what I'm using. That's what I'm doing right now, is learning CS. So like these very basic paths that are like really easy for people to just like it's very tangible, right? You can just, if you want to learn about a new programming language, you just look at the path. You can just Google the path. Google Python, Google JavaScript, Google C, right? And you can just start learning about these programming languages. And they're made to be accessible. It's made that way on purpose, right? Because the whole point of a programming language is that they have to onboard employees, developers, to learn it, and then so that they can solve a specific problem. And so these are like very easy paths to find, very easy to start. And I suggest you just start every single one of these paths a little bit, okay? Just a little bit. You don't even have to like really get into it. You just look at it, learn a little bit about it, and then move on, okay? And you should do that for each of these very easy paths, if they're in the domain of your degree or whatever. You have to think big picture here. Like, what do you want to be, right? What is your degree? Like, what is your domain of knowledge? Mine's computer science, so I would learn about programming languages. And I haven't done this because I just like, it's just something I'm recently trying to, you know, I'm recently coming across, is that breadth, when it comes to knowledge and like a knowledge tree, is so much more important than depth. Because, I mean, there's certain paths that are really important for you to learn if you want to get a really good understanding of certain things. Like, for instance, learning C is a very good path to go down if you're in CS. It's a very good path. Because it's just referencing so much. And that's the point of understanding these paths, is that they reference each other, right? They connect. And so when you get down to like here, and you don't have this knowledge, right? You don't have, let me circle it, you don't have this knowledge. This is known as a knowledge gap, right? It means that learning this bit right here is going to be really difficult because you don't have this knowledge to go down. And this knowledge could be something like a build tool in your programming project. Like, you're not very familiar with the build tool, so now you have to, it's really difficult to actually deploy, or like, I don't really know what's going on in terms of like running and building this project. And I certainly can't, you know, like publish it on GitHub because I don't actually know like how to set this up. And so you just want to focus on the breadth of knowledge. Focus on the paths. And then once you're here, now it's just so easy. You can just keep learning. You want to do breadth first search. That's my recommendation. Breadth first search the domain of knowledge you're in. Okay? And it's amazing too, because when you do this, you will come across knowledge that you didn't even know existed, right? Like when people learn about programming languages, they didn't know about programming paradigms. Like, no one tells you that, right? They say, okay, we're learning Java. This is object-oriented programming. No one knows what that actually means, right? When you're first starting, no one actually knows that. But they know what Java is, I guess. Like, they're learning Java, but they don't know what object-oriented programming is compared to these other paradigms. Like, they don't know how it relates. But imagine you just go into like a computer science class with this like massive breadth of knowledge. It might not even be like that in depth, but you just like know the basics of a bunch of different things. Now you understand like why this is occurring, like what even OOP is there for, like what problem is it trying to solve, and now you have such an easier time with this class. And like that's why a lot of older people, I find, when they learn like new stuff, they have all this crystallized knowledge, right? And they can just learn things so much quicker than like someone like me who's literally like 20 years old and I started programming at 17. Like, and I really didn't care for computers that much. Like, I didn't care to learn the specifics really, like the hardware and stuff, but I just fell in love with the problem solving aspect of it. And now I'm having to learn this massive, I'm realizing that I have to learn this massive breadth of knowledge first. And I'm doing that, and I'm succeeding a lot. I'm really succeeding because I have all these things that I can reference now. And I'm running into these paths that are just like really, really helpful. Like for instance, GNU core utils. This is another one of those things where like no one knows what this is, and it's just something you happen to stumble across. Maybe you're like a Linux administrator, like you just happen to stumble across this when you're like preparing for a certification, and you start reading about this, and you're realizing, oh my gosh, this is actually bash scripting. Like this is so helpful for creating a productive environment for learning in my shell. And it's just it's so crazy how this sort of shift in this change in mindset, how crazy it would be, how crazy beneficial it is for people. And they just don't, a lot of people just stick with this specific domain, like they stick to a specific path and they never branch out. And I'm telling you right now, you will not regret doing it this way, because you will be at a point where like you have this massive knowledge base and you have a little bit of depth in everything, and then you find something you really love, right? You really want to learn this. It is just like this is for me, right? And recently, it's not entirely like that, but Maxima is something I found recently, and I do math and physics tutoring, and I came across Maxima, which is free open source CAS, so computer algebra system. And I started reading about this and I was just like blown away by how easy it was to use, and to like I could see the benefit it could bring to not only like helping me verify, you know, my work that I do, but also maybe even like creating new programs that like use Maxima and can now like make all these projects using this open source tool. And I'm just like, man, I'm so glad that I just changed my focus, because originally I was someone who was like really into Java, right? And I know that's crazy. A lot of people are like, well, how are you into Java? That's disgusting. But it was the first language I learned like in depth, and I just hyper focused on literally like memorizing the standard library and like memorizing the syntax, which the syntax isn't actually that hard to memorize once you really get into it, but the standard library is massive, and I wanted to like memorize it. And I had plans on like creating projects that like they would like gamify learning literal specification for the language, which is just a monstrous, like monumental task, because I wanted it to be like a website. And I didn't even know about like Java frameworks and like web frameworks I didn't know like the basics of Node, and I still have to learn a lot of that stuff, to be honest. But a lot of it is motivation, and I do have this framework now, and I think I've naturally had this framework for a long time after I've kind of drifted away from Java. But yeah, the only thing that stops me now is motivation, and it really doesn't take that much motivation to just like learn something new if you're curious enough. But yeah, I mean that's the basics of what I wanted to talk about. And another thing is that like, yeah, there's just certain paths that are like really inaccessible, like paths that are like so far out there, and you have this branch, right? It's so far out there, it's so far away, And then you just have like this itty bitty path that like incrementally somehow gets over there. And like maybe there's this other path that's like from some obscure thing, and like it somehow links, like these somehow come together, or like some crazy thing, and it somehow links right here. Like that's the point of doing this, okay? Is that so many people would like live their lives and they never get here. They never get here. And maybe the only way you ever will get there and reach this path is if you actually have the breath, if you have both of these, right? Maybe you need both of these paths to ever get here. And it's crazy to think about that, right? And both of these paths are really obscure, but like this path in particular is super obscure. And maybe you learn this path and you're like blown away by how important it is, how it just dramatically changes your productivity somehow, or you just like you come up with a project idea and then you learn the path and then you have enough knowledge to create the project, and it's just, it fundamentally changes everything, right? Like that's why having the breath first is so important, because it makes learning so much more efficient. It makes learning so much more efficient, and you understand so much more if you prioritize breath first. Because the way breath works is that it accelerates your learning, because you're having these other connections, right? This is a connection, and then you have accelerated learning down here, and you're just way more efficient when you're learning this way, okay? You're way more efficient. So yeah, I mean, that's the gist of what I want to talk about, is that you have to, if you feel like you want to change the world, right? No one really talks about, maybe I want to change the world. You have to do it this way, because it's so much more efficient. It's so much more efficient. And yeah, if you want to make like a crazy project before you die, this is what you have to do. And yeah, I'm done now. Thank you for listening. Subscribe.